Hello, you're listening to the Tank Magazine podcast, and on this episode, Tank's fashion features director Tamsin Blanchard talks with the fashion designer Ashish Gupta, more commonly known simply as Ashish. Ashish took a bow at the end of his London Fashion Week Spring-Summer 2017 show, wearing a t-shirt with the word immigrant printed on it. The collection itself was a kitsch and colourful celebration of the marriage between Anglo and Indian cultures, as inspired by the 1966 Hindi-language film Amrapali. Meeting at his studio near Broadway Market in East London, they discussed fashion as politics, working as an immigrant designer, and cultural appropriation. The full text version of this interview is published in the Tank Gossip issue.
Obviously, I was interested to talk to you after the Spring and Summer show, because I just thought it seemed to kind of really, the message really hit home, and I think a lot of people were kind of feeling the same way.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if had you ever done anything as kind of political as that before?
I mean, I've done stuff obviously that's been political. For example, well, I don't know if you call it political, but I did a show a couple of years ago. I had all black models. Then I did the coloured afros the season before. I've done more stuff with kind of just messaging. Like I did that Love Will Win, when there was that whole thing about the Olympics in Russia and homosexuality being recriminalized in India, and I felt really strongly that somebody needed to say something about it. I mean, I didn't actually think about it as political before when I was doing it. I just did it because I did it as a kind of almost like an emotional reaction to what had happened.
Right, so you couldn't just carry on as though nothing had happened.
No. In fact, I just think that everything that has happened this year with, Brexit, Trump, I mean, I don't actually understand how anyone creative can remove themselves from that, because I just think it's the zeitgeist, it's the world we're living in, and I would find it impossible, I think, to remove myself from all that and just create without any consideration for any of that stuff.
Did you feel angry after Brexit, or was it?
Yeah, I felt really angry. I felt really sad, and I felt. I moved here when I was I think I was 20 when I moved here, and I've, since I moved here, I've felt like this was my home, and I've built a life here. I'd never let any of the racism or the stereotyping or any of that get to me, and I'd always thought we were moving towards a brighter, more positive future, and things were getting better. And, if you live in a big city, you don't really see that kind of ugly side of things. And I just think Brexit really kind of brought that to the fore, and just the kind of things that you heard people saying the day after. It kind of really made me question everything, and it made me feel quite disillusioned for a bit. And also it didn't make any sense to me apart from anything. It just felt so kind of random, like people didn't really know what they were talking about.
Yeah. Did you feel as though you'd been living in a bubble?
No, because I don't think I've ever felt like I was living in a bubble. I've always been really interested in current affairs, and when I was growing up, I kind of actually wanted to be a journalist or a writer, and fashion was kind of not that high up on my list of things that I really wanted to do, and I just ended up doing it because in the end, I felt like I wanted to do something creative, and I loved it.
And so with the collection that you did, so you chose to really celebrate your culture? Is that?
Kind of. I mean, I guess it was, the whole idea of it was the fact that Indian culture in a way is so integral to British culture, the fact that we were British colony for so long. The thing that actually inspired the collection to start with was I think it's a film from the 60s called Amrapali, and it's about, there's a very sad scene in it where she's kind of her lover's gone away and she's kind of missing him and she's lonely and she's kind of trapped in this palace, and she's kind of singing this song, and it's at night and it's all stars, and it's very beautiful and sad and romantic at the same time. And it kind of just made me think about how he's left her and she's alone, and it in a way it kind of tied up with this idea of immigration and going away and being in a foreign country and leaving your family behind and leaving all your loved ones behind, and then you move somewhere you for a better future or for whatever reasons, but there's always that longing of kind of your home or where you came from. But it's interesting in England because actually there's such a diverse kind of culture here, and I've never felt like I wasn't at home. So it's kind of a weird contradiction in a way. And I think in the collection, what I wanted to do was really present that idea of it being like a marriage in a way, not just of people but of cultures. And then I decided I was going to wear the immigrant top because I felt I was so sick of the way that word has been used. And actually, ever since I immigrated to this country, when I went through the whole immigration process, I found it incredibly demeaning. It was an awful, awful process, and I actually find it really shocking that people have to undergo that for 6 years, that kind of scrutiny and that kind of...
So what did you have to experience?
It was crazy because I came here on... first I was on a student visa, then I lived in Canada for a while. When I came back, I came on something called an HSMP visa, which was a highly skilled migrant program.
And this was from Delhi?
This was from Delhi. I had an Indian passport. I'd studied here, I'd done my MA here, but I had to leave. And I went to live in Canada for a few years because I had to constantly prove to them that I was earning a certain amount of money, I was paying taxes, I was doing what I promised to do. I had to collect every single piece of press that I had. I had to get letters, and this is like every year or every, I think, year or then 2 years or something. But you had to basically prove to them that you were doing what you promised to do. You were doing it well. You were earning money. You were paying your taxes. You were, you were doing all the things and more that you were supposed to do. And if you weren't going to match up to any of those things, you were going to have to leave. But it was just that idea of like having the pressure of, doing the collections, doing the shows, selling, but then also having this kind of body that you had to kind of prove to that you were doing all those things, and you had to catalog every single thing that you did. You had to, like send them lookbooks from the show. You had to send them tickets. You had to do all that stuff to just prove that you weren't faking it. And at any time you felt you could be basically asked to leave the country. So it was an incredible amount of pressure.
So it's like you were always skating on thin ice.
Yeah, constantly. And you were never sure what was going to happen to you, So did you feel as though immigrant was a kind of dirty word? Well, I feel like it is a dirty word. It is used as a dirty word mostly. And also I think it's quite interesting that when white people move to another country, they're called expats, conveniently. But when you're not white and you move to another country, you're called an immigrant. Like all the white people that live in India aren't called immigrants, they're called expats. And actually after the show happened, so many people wrote to me. And it was really touching actually. And there's one girl wrote to me and said how they'd had their family owned a store and it had been graffitied with the word immigrant when she was a child, and they all had to clean it. It's that whole history of politics using a group of people, demonizing a group of people, and basically, making people perceive them as kind of sponges or whatever. I was so sick and tired of turning the TV on, and all you heard was immigration. Oh, we have to cut down immigration. And I was thinking, this is crazy. Like, this is such a lack of education, and this is so offensive to a group of people that are doing nothing apart from working really hard, paying taxes, and just trying to make a fucking living. And they've come here because they want a better life. They're contributing to your economy, your culture, your tax system. And it's not their fault that you haven't adapted your infrastructure to them. It's not their fault that they pay all these taxes, but you don't use that tax money to increase your infrastructures to cater towards those people. And I'm sorry, but after having colonized most of the world, if you do have people that are coming here as refugees or people that are in desperate need of help, children where it's a matter of life or death, surely you should look on that compassionately and you should treat that with kindness and love rather than this really awful kind of we can't have you here, we don't have the blah blah. I just think it's very sad. And in fact, originally I wanted to put "fucking immigrant" on the T-shirt because I just thought, well, that's kind of what people mean when they say it.
Right.
But then I thought, no, I want it to be a positive thing, and I want to actually try and reclaim the word, and I want people to have really think about it. I want them to think about what we contribute, not just in terms of the taxes, but in terms of the culture. The best Indian food you've probably eaten has come from some Indian family who's moved here and set up a little restaurant. Or the children that speak more than one language, the people that fall in love. I mean, it's a bit idealistic, I suppose, but it's kind of sad that that's how we live and treat other people.
And do you see any light at the end of the tunnel? Do you see...
I feel when stuff happens like this, I feel at least usually you get some really good art coming out of it. I feel like artists and writers really wake up and produce really interesting, revolutionary work. So I'm hoping that's going to be something. And I guess the other thing is that maybe this will unite all the kind of left wing people into stronger parties and the liberals, and they'll come together hopefully and kind of fight what's going on. I think there's such a wave of crazy fundamentalist right-wingism sweeping across the world.
And maybe people have had it.
I think people have been a little bit, I think people have got really comfortable and they've been snoozing a little bit and kind of thinking things are chugging along quite nicely, but there's been all this stuff bubbling up. And maybe in a way this is like a wake-up call, and it's like and you just hope it's not too late.
Yeah.
But with the show, I think just my main reason of that was just to kind of express how I was feeling at the time. And this whole immigrant thing really just, it's annoying, It's like the way they talk about it, we need to control it, and also actually the other thing that winds me up is this whole, when people say we're a tolerant society, we tolerate other cultures, I just feel like tolerate is such a horrible word to use. You tolerate bad weather or mice, you don't tolerate people. I think that language is so important, and I think a lot of language has been lost because it's been used in certain ways for so long that people have got used to it and nobody questions things that are being said now. And I think it's important to actually stand up and go, hang on a minute, I'm an immigrant, I'm not comfortable with being talked about like this. Thank you very much.
Yeah. And in the casting for the show, you used Richie Shazam.
Yeah.
So he was cast as was he a god or what was his...
I didn't even think about that when we were... I mean, that is just something... I think people have just read lots of stuff into it, but actually for me it was it's just this feeling of drawing from a lot of stuff that I experienced when I was growing up. It was a lot to do with, kind of folk tales and kind of just iconography and just kind of imagery just growing up. As a child in India, and I didn't actually consciously think of it in terms of like I'm doing something religious, I'm doing something to do with gods or anything. It wasn't like that at all. I mean, actually in Indian miniature painting, the color blue is just used to depict dark skin. I didn't really cast him as a god or anything. I just cast him as a kind of interesting, weird, like a kind of character.
With a snake.
But of course, subconsciously, that probably draws from imagery that I've got in my head from probably when I was 7 years old or something.
So the kind of the criticism I think that somebody made about cultural appropriation, which is
ridiculous because you can't appropriate your own culture. Exactly. But my point with that is I get the whole argument about cultural appropriation, and I get the whole argument that if you're going to use a culture, you really need to you need to respect that firstly, and you need to kind of acknowledge where it's come from. But equally in fashion, I think it's unfair when you've got all white models and then you're using another culture. And I think it's a bit like when they make movies and they've got like, you know, an Indian character, but they're getting a white person to play that Indian character, as though there was a dearth of Indian actors. I think it's a little bit like that.
Yeah.
It just feels a little bit lazy.
Yeah. Do you think that it's laziness that has resulted in the fashion industry being so undiverse? Or do you feel like it is getting more diverse? And
I don't actually understand it.
Right.
I don't really know. Do you think it's laziness?
I think maybe there is an element of laziness. I mean, it seems that, I mean, there are people obviously commenting on the lack of diversity that you see.
But then I think a lot of people's answer to that is they'll have like one black model in a show or two. And I feel like, you know, when you get on a train, do you see one black person on the train? Like, it's crazy. There's just...
It's just not reflective of the society.
It's not representative.
That
Exactly. And it's not even black and white, you know. I think there's so much in between. There's like a rainbow of colours.
To hear more podcasts from Tank Magazine, be sure to subscribe through the iTunes Store. The theme music for this podcast is taken from Waiting Games by Kate Simcoe and the London Electronic Orchestra.